so much information, so much powerful information. Tell me a little bit, for example, the section 2, the area called section 2 of the book. Can you talk a little bit about that and what it is you really looked at? I found that very, very interesting, how you looked at the Taino in relation to the natural resources. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, society's success is also based on how they're able to utilize the natural resources in terms of the technology, their subsistence, their development of their worldview, symbolism and so forth. This tended to look at more of a subsistence-based, showcasing through Wendy Lee's paper, the range of Jamaica's natural history. And I found that, it was short and sweet. But it showcased, how diverse Jamaica, the landforms or topography or weather or climates, and that kind of environment would produce not just an interesting biodiversity that we have presently now, but also how the Tainos would later be able to utilize it. The second section was actually a paper by me which looked at how they exploited natural resources and how natural resources in terms of flora and how it is manifested in both direct and indirect means.
I was particularly taken with that article, Lesley-Gail, because if I might go to a little level of detail here, I was looking at all the plants that were introduced by these people into this country,
both deliberately and incidentally. Biological.
Sweet potato, that is one of my favorite foods. That was introduced by the Tainos.
Yes, potato.
So I have them to thank.
Yes.
Cassava.
Yes.
Yampi.
Well, you remember there are two types of cassava, your sweet and bitter. So bitter cassava was present and indigenous in the islands. But the sweet cassava was introduced.
They introduced Manihot esquelenta. I'm reading the Latin name here. Arrowroot.
Yes. Which we make porridge from now.
Yes. Indian kale. You remember there was no pepper pot soup that was complete without Indian kale in my parish.
They didn't really make pepper pot soup, that's a big misnomer.
No.
Stew.
I'm talking about my life now, growing up.
Okay.
My grandmother made a wicked pepper pot soup, but it was not complete without Indian kale. Yeah. And Indian kale here, I'm seeing, was introduced by the Tainos. Maize, pineapple.
Yes, which the Hawaiians are getting all the credit, but it was brought to Hawaii from
Jamaica.
No, not just from here, from this region.
Okay, from this region, not specifically from Jamaica, but from this region.
A lot of these plants, they became domesticated in Central and South America, especially like cassava, which is very, very core in the African diet that was brought over.
And it seems squashes as well.
Yes.
Okay. What about, this is the flora side, what about on the fauna side?
Well, that's a little bit more difficult to ascertain because some animals probably, they believe that during like the Quarantine period, some animal species or the origins of them came on like rafts or vessels or so forth, or birds flying and nesting, during various migration periods. But we had a lot more animals than we do have now. There was the sloth, the American sloth, which we found evidence of in Cuba and in Haiti, but we haven't found evidence of it here in Jamaica. But we had like the monkey, which was the Jamaican monkey, which was alive until about the 18th century when it became extinct. So that would have been a part of there. But interestingly, I haven't really found any evidence of monkeys being depicted in Jamaican cave art, so I'm not quite sure or heard any references of them utilizing them.
I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about some of the artifacts we have here, Lesley-Gail. But before that, there's an interesting section in the book where you talk about caves.
Yes.
And you talk about petroglyphs and pictographs. Right. What's the difference?
Well, they're what you call cave or rock art. Basically how man manifests materials to produce these images. Petroglyphs are carvings. If you go to One Bobby Susan Ramon, went to Woodside, that is a petroglyph. So it's a carving, usually utilizing a feature like a stalagmite or a stalactite. And in Jamaica, interestingly, most of these are found at the entrance. And we think it's associated with the Taino creation story because they believe that the first man came from the cave, right? The pictographs are drawings, and they would use various natural resources such as ores, okra, resins from trees, even charcoal, bat guano, to make depictions on the walls. And I find it interesting that you normally see these like on panels or on the roofs of the cave sites that we've uncovered so far. And our most prominent pictograph site is actually Mountain River Cave, which is in St. Catherine. It's beautiful.
Why was it important to these people to do these things? What was it an expression of?
Well, it is like their form of hieroglyphics. It's their form of telling, their story, talking about the animals that matter to them, the events, because some of them are anthropomorphic. Some of them actually look like shamans or behikes. Which were
you have to explain that for me.
Well, everybody knows shaman, they're medicine man, religious leader in Taino, which is behike. So you actually see them some depicted with their headdress, which could also be representations of their caciques. Because the caciques were said in ethnohistory to have elaborate headdresses, so probably they were also depictions of specific rituals, like the Kohaba ceremony and the cleansing and so forth that took place during these ceremonies.
And you're taking me actually to a place that I'd planned to go later, but you mentioned rituals. And in their book, in one article, I've forgotten who wrote that article, it mentioned that Columbus was one of the few Europeans who actually was able to see a Taino ritual, and that ritual involved the use of semis.
Oh, that would be Saunders and Gray.
Oh,
Nicholas Saunders and Dory Gray. Yeah.
So semis were also found. Have semis also been found in the caves?
Yes. Our most recent discovery was Abaca in '92. They had a ceremonial staff, which is broken actually, but is actually as tall as I am. And it's broken, so you can imagine how majestic that must have been.
Wow.
And they have avian. You find like birds are messengers from the spirit world because they can move between the land of the living and the sky and so forth. So you find a lot of bird images used in Taino zemis. We call them zemis in English, but in the Spanish they refer to them as semis, and they spell it with a C versus with a Z. But some of our other more spectacular finds are referred to as the Carpenter's Mountain in Manchester that was discovered in 1792, which are now housed in the British Museum of Mankind. And sadly, you'd have to go to London to see them. But they're really
as in London,
special.
England.
Yes.
The zemis, I thought, were interesting because they seem to be linked to worship.
Yes, and the type of wood that was used in their reproduction, like for example, the lignum vitae. Lignum vitae flower is our national flower in Jamaica because of its beauty and its indigeneity, but it was also a holy flower to the Taino, and it was believed that they made a decoction from the lignum vitae tree to cure syphilis, which was considered then a holy disease. I don't know how a disease could be holy, but that is based on their sources.
That's very interesting because there's a Jamaican folk song about the lignum vitae, and it talks about people using the lignum vitae for various.
Yes, a lot of the plants have medicinal, qualities, which we know,
right.
Because we're pharmaceuticals exploit them, and we as believers in folk medicine, that's a part of the Jamaican tradition and culture.
Right, but being a part of Jamaican tradition and culture, it also came from somewhere.
Yes.
So we're seeing actually that there is evidence that some of this came from the Taino people, because the thinking has always been, I think, I could be wrong, but to a large extent, it thinks that our relationship to natural medicines, the earth and what it provides, has been through our African ancestry.
Yes, that I tend to have a problem with that, and it is not that I'm not Afrocentric or love of African, because I am an African woman. But I find it is easier to just blanket everything as African or European, but it is a lot more intricate than that, because in archaeology you find that a lot of people use similar resources the same way. Like for example, thatch. right? Thatch is used by the Africans. It's used by the indigenous groups in the Americas. It's used by the Europeans. You go to Scotland and you see thatch roof houses. One of the ways in defining the differences between them is how the thatch was placked and how they were, probably put together and assembled on the houses. In the region, we tend to assume that the thatch was brought with the Africans, but the thatch roofing style existed prior to the African arrival.
Lesley-Gail, a country like Jamaica, we're celebrating Black History Month. That's
interesting, being that blacks are majority.
How do we continue to make our history as perhaps black people, but at the same time recognize people like the Tainos who have made such an important contribution to who we are today?
I think we have to be open, and I think we have to try not to be so hypocritical. No, we are a bit hypocritical. We choose which sides that we want to straddle when it suits us. It's like being a cafeteria Catholic. You choose which aspects of the religion you want to take up, but it can't be like that. You have to embrace the good and the bad in all of these. And as an archaeologist, I am a lover of all the ethnic groups. They all played a part. They're all the reasons why we are as unique as we are today, even though there are a lot of similarities in the Caribbean, especially along because of the whole history of colonization and, enslavement and freedom, fight for freedom and this passion. But at the same time, Jamaica is outstanding in its own merits, and it should be honored and recognized.
So we have legitimacy then in talking about the Taino people, even as we talk and every time we talk about Black history, as far as it pertains to Jamaica.
Well, my take is this: that whether we want to accept it or not, a lot of times we live in a white man's world. The whole concept of first world versus second and third world, and I find it interesting. Once you're not white, you're black, you're colored, and indigenous people are recognized as, you don't hear of white indigenous people to that. Most indigenous populations, at least the 6% of the world that they are, tend to be people of color. And regardless of whether it is black history or we don't have colored history, we don't celebrate indigenous history as much as we should, they need to be respected. Their contributions need to be valid, and proper documentation and research needs to be done to showcase, all the dynamics of their livelihood.
Right, well, could you just comment on some of these artifacts?
Well, here are a few artifacts, courtesy of the Jamaica National Heritage Trust, that were taken from Taino sites, primarily White Mall, which is my favorite site because it was the oldest and longest occupied and explored. White Mall, as you know, was a site that was destroyed in the creation of the Spanish Town highway. It's across from, it's near where we have the Lasco factory. And here are like my favorite pieces, which are what we call celts, and they're actually blades of axes, because their technology was mostly stone. So they're called petuloid celts because they look actually like petals. They have a petal shape, yes, tear shaped, and some of them are ceremonial, and some of them were you can see evidence of them being worked where they were used either by hand, or they were hafted in wood to create what we know as axes. Right. So these are what they used to fell trees and to make the dugout canoes, which literally is using these and digging out to create these vessels. And with the African Jamaicans refer to them as thunderbolts because in the old day they would drop them in the yappa pots, and they were found in the fields, and they thought they were from the heavens, and they were used to cool water prior to days of refrigeration. Here we have a round bowl. The Taino technology is actually coiled. So they would make clay coils, and then they would work it and smooth it out. And actually, you can actually see some of
Yes, I can see that very
evidence
clearly.
of the smoothing.
Now that you mention it.
Right. And so forth. And it had different shapes. This is just one of many. You had partitioned ones, you had round ones, you had boat-shaped with the sides coming up. And, pots were used not just for storage and for food, but also for funerary practices, especially with the case of infants. and so forth. And sometimes you would find in caves where not all the skeletal material were placed in, but selective pieces. You know, they had their preferences. Here are just really examples of the decorative handles that you can find. They're very intricate. You can see
beautiful.
Animal,
yes, that's a face. Yes,
the face and thing. And with the earlier period, the Estonian and the redware, they had a very sharp red coloring, and those were mostly of animal motif. While the later periods tend to be more geometric in design and anthropomorphic.
The red color, would that have come from a dye or from the earth?
They use
from the earth.
soil.
Bauxite soil.
The bauxite soil. Now here, this is actually the handle of a water jar. It looks like a face.
It does.
But water jars, especially prehistoric water jars, have only really been found here in Jamaica. So it's actually something unique. And some of these vessels were huge, you know, and their mouths varied according to the period. As they got more skilled, they became more refined. And we actually have evidence of a merging of the Hispanic and the Taino cultures with new civil wear, or what you call colonial wear, where they used Taino traditions to make European vessels. And that is actually seen here in the book mentioned by Robin Woodward. And you can see an example of new civil wear.
This is on page 171.
Right.
Yes, I see that.
Right. And this is another example, because these are not Taino designs. These are European designs.
Yes.
And even the Africans.
So, Lesley-Gail, I thank you. Mm-hmm. But I have one last question. You've written a book for adults. Mm-hmm. When will you write the book for the children? To be put in the school curriculum?
Well, the school curriculum is up to the Ministry of Education.
Yes, but they can't manage without resources. They have to have materials.
I find a lot of reluctance. I find it interesting doing tours and hearing what the students know of the indigenous people. A lot of it is faulty. And that is what's in the CXC.
A lot of it is faulty.
It's faulty.
So, Lesley-Gail, you have to correct that. You have to do the book for the children.
Okay, well, we'll work on it. We'll work on it. That will be my next project with UA Press. We'll work on it.
Oh, okay. I want to thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you, Lesley-Gail. It's been an honor being in your company. And I just love you because you love prehistory and the Taino people.
Oh, thank you, Fifi.
It's my pleasure.